Here is a truth that most people never consider until it's too late. The most dangerous moment in any crisis is not when the store shelves are bare. It is not when the power has been out for 3 days, or when the roads are blocked, or when the news stops making sense. The most dangerous moment is quieter than that. It arrives when your pantry is still full, but nothing inside it can actually keep you alive past the first few weeks. Most of what fills a modern kitchen was designed for convenience, not endurance. It was built for Tuesday night, not for month 3 of a real disruption. And by the time most people realize the difference, the window to fix it has already closed. In this video, you are going to learn about 6 specific foods that form a complete biological survival system. Not a random stockpile, not a panic buy list. A deliberate, science-backed foundation that covers every critical need the human body has: electrolytes, fats, slow-burning fuel, protein, and psychological stability. Each one of these foods was chosen for a reason that goes far deeper than calories. And by the end of this video, you will understand not just what to store, but why each item belongs there and what happens to your body if it is missing. Stay until the end, because the last point is the one most people overlook completely, and it may be the most important one of all. Welcome to Essential Pantry, the channel dedicated to calm, strategic, intelligent preparation. If this is your first time here, consider subscribing. This is exactly the kind of content we make, and there is a great deal more where this came from. Let's get into it. Let's begin with something almost no one talks about when they discuss survival food, and that is the speed at which the human body begins to fail when it is missing specific things. Most people assume the primary threat in a prolonged crisis is starvation. It is not. Starvation is a slow process. The body can survive weeks without food if it has to. What it cannot survive, at least not without serious consequences, is an electrolyte imbalance. And the most critical electrolyte of all is one you probably have sitting in a shaker on your kitchen table right now: iodized salt. Salt is one of the most misunderstood items in the context of preparedness. It gets dismissed as cheap, common, and barely worth thinking about. That dismissal is a serious mistake. During any kind of physical stress, extreme cold, heavy labor, even the elevated anxiety of a crisis itself, the body loses sodium continuously through sweat and respiration. If you are consuming water to stay hydrated without replacing that sodium, you are creating a condition called hyponatremia. The symptoms begin with confusion and dizziness. They progress to muscle weakness and irregular heartbeat. In severe cases, it becomes life-threatening, and it can do so within 24 to 48 hours. For adults over the age of 50, this risk is significantly higher. The body's ability to self-regulate internal chemical balances decreases with age. What a younger person might experience as mild discomfort can become a genuine medical emergency for an older adult, particularly in a situation where medical help is not easily accessible. But the importance of salt does not stop at physiology. When the power grid fails, the cold chain breaks with it. The refrigerator, the freezer, the meat in your kitchen, all of it begins a countdown towards spoilage within days. Salt is the oldest preservation technology in human history for a reason. It allows you to cure meat, ferment vegetables, and extend the lifespan of perishable calories that would otherwise be lost entirely. And beyond that, beyond your own kitchen, salt carries an extraordinary barter value in any broken or disrupted economy. It is light, it is easy to divide into small portions, it does not expire, it does not rot, and every single person around you will need it just as much as you do. In a world where supply chains have failed, salt becomes as close to a universal currency as anything you are likely to have on hand. Store far more than you think you need. The cost is almost nothing now. The value, in the wrong circumstances, is almost incalculable. Now, alongside salt, there is a second physiological need that is almost universally underprepared, and this one is more subtle in the way it damages you. Most people who think seriously about food storage focus heavily on carbohydrates and protein. They fill their shelves with rice, pasta, canned goods, and protein bars. What they consistently underestimate or ignore entirely is fat. This is not a minor oversight. This is the kind of gap that quietly dismantles your ability to function. There is a historical phenomenon that hunters in the far north sometimes encountered, which researchers came to call rabbit starvation. These were men who had plenty of food. They were eating regularly. They had protein, lean game primarily, rabbit in abundance. And yet they wasted away. Their bodies deteriorated despite having calories because those calories were almost entirely devoid of fat. Without dietary fat, the body cannot properly process nutrients, cannot maintain its metabolic engine, and cannot regulate the hormonal systems that keep you functional. The human brain is roughly 60% lipid. Fat is not a luxury nutrient, it is structural. Without adequate dietary fat, cognitive function begins to decline, memory becomes unreliable, emotional regulation breaks down, and decision-making suffers. For anyone over 50, the stakes are even higher. Fat is directly tied to hormone production, which in turn affects bone density, muscle integrity, and immune response. The ideal solution to this problem, from a purely practical standpoint, is peanut butter. A single standard jar of peanut butter can contain up to 3,000 calories. It requires no cooking, no refrigeration, and no preparation of any kind. It is shelf-stable for an extended period, and in its simplest form, peanuts and salt, nothing else, it contains healthy, stable fats that the body can use efficiently. Beyond its caloric density, fat serves a specific thermal function that becomes critically important in cold weather survival scenarios. Carbohydrates burn quickly and brightly, like paper. Fat burns slowly and steadily, like coal. When you are shoveling ice off a walkway or repairing a broken window in winter or managing a home without central heating, a few spoonfuls of peanut butter can provide the kind of sustained thermal energy that prevents the deep, dangerous fatigue that leads to poor judgment and physical collapse. When you are selecting peanut butter for long-term storage, pay attention to the ingredient list. The only ingredients should be peanuts and salt. Avoid varieties with hydrogenated oils or added sugars. Those additives reduce the stability of the product and compromise the quality of the fat. There is a third piece of this first layer of survival nutrition, and this one is about efficiency in a very specific and often overlooked sense. When most people think about fuel in a survival scenario, they think about their food. They rarely think about the energy required to prepare that food. But in an extended disruption, the fuel used to cook, whether that is propane, firewood, or electricity, is just as finite and just as precious as the food itself. And many of the most commonly stored survival foods are, quietly, enormous liabilities in this regard. Dry beans, for example, require significant soaking time and long periods of boiling. White rice, prepared traditionally, requires sustained heat. These foods are valuable, and we will get to why shortly, but they carry a hidden cost in fuel that must be accounted for. Oats do not have this problem. Rolled oats can be prepared with nothing more than a few minutes of contact with hot water. They can even be soaked overnight in cold water and eaten without any heat at all. This makes them one of the most fuel-efficient foods you can store. Every unit of cooking energy you save on breakfast is a unit you preserve for a more critical use later. Physiologically, oats offer something that refined grains cannot match, a lower glycemic index, meaning that the energy they provide enters the bloodstream gradually rather than in a sudden spike. The result is sustained mental and physical energy rather than the sharp rise and crash that comes from processed carbohydrates. In a high-pressure situation where clarity of thought and physical steadiness are essential, this matters more than most people realize. And there is one more dimension to oats that is easy to underestimate. In a prolonged crisis, especially for families with children or elderly members, the disruption of daily routine is itself a source of profound psychological distress. A warm bowl of oatmeal in the morning costs almost nothing in terms of fuel, time, or preparation. But what it provides, the sense of normalcy, the signal that the morning is under control, that life still has structure, is something that no amount of stored calories can replicate on its own. Routine is a form of stability, and stability in a crisis is a survival resource. Once the immediate physiological foundations are covered, electrolytes, fats, and efficient fuel, the next layer of survival preparedness addresses something that only becomes fully apparent after the first week or two of a real disruption. That is protein. In the short term, the body can compensate for a lack of protein by drawing on its own reserves, but those reserves are not unlimited, and the damage that accumulates from protein deficiency is not just a matter of hunger or weakness, it is structural. After approximately 2 weeks of inadequate protein intake, the body begins to break down muscle tissue to meet its own amino acid requirements. Wound healing slows dramatically. The immune system loses its capacity to produce adequate antibodies. For adults over 50, this process accelerates because the ability to synthesize protein from dietary sources is already reduced with age, meaning that the margin for error is smaller to begin with. The challenge, of course, is that the most nutritionally complete protein sources available in a modern kitchen, meat, eggs, dairy, are entirely dependent on refrigeration. The moment the cold chain fails, those sources begin a countdown. Within days, they are gone. This is where dried beans become one of the most strategically important items in any serious food storage system. Dried beans are, in the simplest terms, protein that waits. They sit on a shelf for decades, in some cases up to 30 years, without losing their nutritional value in any meaningful way. They do not require refrigeration, they do not spoil in the way perishable foods do, and when they are properly prepared and combined with the right carbohydrate source, they provide a nutritional profile that can support genuine long-term physical health, not just short-term survival. That combination, beans paired with rice, is one of the most nutritionally significant pairings in human dietary history. Neither beans nor rice provides a complete protein structure. Beans are low in methionine, rice is low in lysine. Together, they supply all of the essential amino acids the body requires to repair tissue, maintain muscle integrity, and support immune function. This is not a coincidence of convenience. Cultures across the world that have relied on these two foods as dietary staples for centuries arrived at this pairing through accumulated nutritional wisdom long before the science existed to explain it. In a survival context, the ability to repair your own body without access to medical care is what might reasonably be called survival capital. Your body is your most critical piece of infrastructure. Beans provide the raw material that infrastructure needs to maintain and restore itself. There is also something psychologically significant about a meal built on beans. Unlike snacks, crackers, energy bars, or even a bowl of plain oats, a substantial serving of beans alongside a grain produces a genuine sense of satiation. The body recognizes it as a real meal. That recognition matters more than it might seem, because the slow deterioration of morale that comes from eating food that never feels quite satisfying is a real and underestimated threat in a prolonged crisis. Now, to anchor all of this together, to give the entire system its foundation, there is one food that stands apart from the rest in terms of its combination of simplicity, longevity, caloric reliability, and universal compatibility. That food is rice. If you had to reduce an entire survival food system to a single item, the logical choice would be a sack of white rice. Not because rice is nutritionally complete on its own, it is not, but because it performs the most fundamental job in a crisis with greater reliability than almost anything else available. It stops the body from entering a state of self-consumption. It provides the caloric baseline that every other nutritional effort builds upon. The numbers are worth understanding concretely. A single 25-kilogram sack of white rice contains enough calories to sustain an adult for more than 40 days. White rice, stored properly in a sealed, cool, low-oxygen environment, retains its quality for up to 30 years. It combines seamlessly with salt, with peanut butter, with beans, and with every other item in this system. It is the ingredient that ties everything else together. But beyond the nutrition and the numbers, rice provides something that is harder to quantify and equally important: certainty. In a crisis, the greatest enemy of rational decision-making is not physical discomfort, it is uncertainty. When you do not know whether you have enough, when you cannot calculate how long your supply will last, when every meal feels like it might be moving you closer to a cliff edge, that psychological pressure compounds every other difficulty you are facing. A large, properly stored supply of rice eliminates that uncertainty. You can count it, you can calculate it, you can divide your supply by your daily caloric requirement and know precisely how many days of baseline sustenance you have in front of you. That mathematical clarity is not a minor psychological comfort. In a high-pressure situation, it is the difference between calm, rational action and the kind of panic that leads people to make decisions they cannot afford to make. The strongest survival systems are not built on variety. They are not built on novelty or expensive preparation kits or an impressive inventory of specialized products. They are built on foundations, and rice is the most dependable foundation available. There is a layer to serious preparedness that goes beyond nutrition, beyond caloric math, and beyond physical survival. And it is a layer that most conversations about food storage never reach. That layer is psychological. It is social, and in many ways, it is what determines whether a household navigates a prolonged crisis with its structure and decision-making capacity intact or fractures under the pressure. To understand this, consider the role that bread has played throughout human history, not just as a food, but as a symbol of order. Researchers who study the relationship between resource scarcity and social stability have found repeatedly that the price and availability of bread is one of the most reliable predictors of social unrest. Not meat, not luxury goods, bread. The most basic staple, the food that sits at the center of the daily meal and signals without words that the ordinary rhythm of life continues. When that rhythm disappears, when the familiar smell of something baking is replaced by the absence of it, something shifts in the psychology of a household, particularly for children, particularly for the elderly. The disruption of mealtime routine does not just affect nutrition, it destabilizes the internal sense of order that allows people to think clearly under pressure. This is where whole wheat berries become something far more significant than just another carbohydrate source. Commercial flour and packaged bread are among the most fragile links in the modern food supply chain. They depend on industrial milling plants, distribution networks, retail systems, and a constant flow of fresh product. In a prolonged disruption, these systems fail early. The flour disappears, the bread disappears, and with them goes the anchor of the daily meal. Whole wheat berries break this dependence entirely. The intact kernel, stored in a cool, sealed, low-oxygen environment, remains viable for 25 to 30 years. When you need flour, you grind the berries. When you have flour, you can bake. And when you can bake, you can place something warm and familiar on the table that signals to everyone in that household that the situation is under control. That signal is not trivial. It is one of the most powerful stabilizing forces available in a crisis. The smell of bread baking does something to the human nervous system that a rationalistic accountant of calories cannot replicate. It communicates safety, it communicates continuity, and in a high-pressure environment where every external signal is telling people that the world has gone wrong, that internal signal of normalcy can be the difference between panic and composure. Complex carbohydrates, it's worth noting, also play a direct role in cognitive stability. Glucose is the brain's preferred fuel. The steady, sustained release of glucose that comes from whole grain sources, as opposed to the sharp spikes and crashes of refined flour, supports the kind of clear, measured thinking that a crisis demands. Preparation is not just about feeding the body, it is about maintaining the mind. Now let's return to salt, because its role extends even further than what was discussed earlier, and this particular dimension is one that most people simply do not consider until they are in the middle of a situation that makes it unavoidable. When refrigeration fails, the preservation of food becomes an active and urgent challenge rather than a passive one. A power outage that lasts more than a few days means that the contents of most modern refrigerators and freezers are lost. The protein, the vegetables, the items that were intended to feed a household for the next week or two, all of it spoils. Without a strategy for dealing with that reality, a household that seemed well prepared can find itself with almost nothing viable within 72 hours of losing power. Salt changes that equation entirely. Properly applied, salt allows you to cure and preserve meat for weeks or months. It enables lacto-fermentation of vegetables, which not only extends their lifespan dramatically, but actually increases their nutritional value through the fermentation process. It transforms a perishable food into a storable one, and in doing so, it bridges the gap between the immediate crisis and the longer-term supply that is waiting in your pantry. But there is another dimension to salt that sits entirely outside the context of your own household, and that is its function as a medium of exchange. In any sufficiently prolonged disruption of normal commerce and supply chains, the nature of economic exchange shifts. Paper currency becomes unreliable when the systems that give it value stop functioning. What takes its place, historically, is trade in essential commodities, and salt is almost perfectly suited to this role. It is small and lightweight enough to transport easily, it can be divided into portions of almost any size, it does not degrade, expire, or lose value over time, and every person around you will need it, for cooking, for preservation, for their own physiological health, just as urgently as you do. This is not a hypothetical drawn from distant history. It is a pattern that repeats in documented form across every major disruption of modern supply systems. The practical value of holding a resource that everyone needs and that can be exchanged for things you may lack is a form of preparedness that goes beyond what you can accomplish by simply filling your own shelves. And this brings us to the final and perhaps most important point of this entire video, because everything discussed here only matters if it is understood in the right way. These 6 items, salt, peanut butter, whole wheat berries, oats, dried beans, and rice, are not a checklist. They are not a shopping list to be completed and forgotten. They are the components of an integrated system. Each one addresses a specific biological requirement. Each one fills a gap that the others leave open. Salt manages electrolyte balance and enables preservation. Peanut butter provides fat for brain function, hormone health, and thermal energy. Wheat berries provide the psychological anchor of bread and the slow cognitive fuel of complex carbohydrates. Oats provide efficient, low-heat fuel for the body and routine for the mind. Beans provide the protein the body needs for structural repair and long-term resilience, and rice provides the caloric foundation that the entire system rests upon. When these 6 elements are in place, you are not merely surviving, you are maintaining your physical strength, your cognitive clarity, your emotional stability, and your ability to make decisions under pressure. You are preserving the conditions that make recovery, and eventually normalcy, possible. Real preparation is not driven by fear. Fear is reactive. Fear makes poor decisions. Real preparation is the transition from fear to calm. It is the knowledge that when the unexpected arrives, you have already thought through what your body needs and made sure those needs are met. When the world outside becomes unstable, your kitchen remains a fortress of order. That is what this is about. If this video gave you something valuable, take a moment to like it. It makes an enormous difference in helping this content reach the people who need it. Subscribe to Essential Pantry if you want to keep building this knowledge, and check out the next video for more practical, intelligent preparation content. We will see you there.